Habarigani, what's the word? Day 3 of Kwanzaa. The word is Ujima, collective work and responsibility. The principle of building and maintaining the community together and making our sisters and brothers' problems our own problems and solving them together. Our speaker today on the principle of Ujima is Dr. Tyra Whittaker. Dr. Tyra Whittaker is a professor of counseling, researcher, consultant, and grant writer. She has received over $8 million in grant funds to meet the needs of racial and ethnic minorities with disabilities and behavioral addictions. She is also the co-founder of the Whittaker Institute for Success and Enrichment, which offers consultation and training and leadership development, person-centered trauma-informed care in diverse communities, and program development. Dr. Whittaker's research interests span several topics, including multicultural rehabilitation, counselor education, racial trauma and reconciliation, and the recruitment and retention of racial and ethnic minorities in counseling. The International Civil Rights Center and Museum is proud to present, speaking on the principle of Ujima, Dr. Tyra Whittaker.
My name is Dr. Tyra Turner Whittaker. The principle we are uplifting today is Ujima, which focuses on collective work and responsibility. I'm indeed honored to celebrate Kwanzaa on today because I absolutely am married to the fact that our healing and our purpose comes collectively and in community. I absolutely enjoy the Kwanzaa celebration as part of my life. In fact, I wore red in order to celebrate the occasion with us on today. Red is one of my favorite colors, but in Kwanzaa, it represents the struggle of our African American brothers and sisters. We will explore this timeless principle and how it connects deeply with our collective historical trauma and intergenerational trauma. Additionally, we will explore our collective resilience and ultimately our emotional liberation within the African American community. As we begin, it is important to understand Ujima in the context of trauma. Ujima is, at its core, about shared responsibility. It is about building and maintaining our community together and making our brothers and sisters' problems our problems and solving them together. It is about a commitment to collective well-being, a collective wholeness. This principle can be applied directly to the experience of trauma in African American communities, both individually and collectively. To understand how Ujima connects to trauma, we must first understand what trauma is and how it manifests within the African American community. Trauma results from an event, a series of events, or a set of circumstances and individual experiences as physically or emotionally harmful or threatening, which may have lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, or even spiritual well-being. This is indeed a powerful definition and description of trauma. It is important to note that trauma can also be experienced by a community. So let's take a closer look at the presence of collective, historical, and current day trauma in the African American community. Collective trauma refers to the psychological, emotional, and social impact experienced by a group of people, often a community or society, in response to a shared traumatic event or series of events. This trauma is not only experienced individually, but also permeates the collective consciousness and can be passed down across generations. African Americans endured collective historical trauma in the United States resulting from the forced displacements of the transatlantic slave trade and the physical, sexual, and psychological abuse from over 400 years of slavery and systemic oppression. I'd like for you to let that number sit with you for a minute. During slavery, African Americans and their children were regarded as property, which often resulted in the forcible separation of families. Trauma was also experienced as a result of witnessing and or experiencing terrorism and lynching, systemic violence, as well as the violence that occurred during the Jim Crow era. African Americans also experienced police brutality and mass incarceration. These catastrophic events did not occur without collateral psychological and emotional damage. Dr. Joy DeGruy, a professor and researcher, brings to the forefront post-traumatic slave syndrome to help explain the emotional and psychological impact of these traumatic experiences. According to Dr. DeGruy, post-traumatic slave syndrome is a condition that exists when a population has experienced multi-generational trauma resulting from centuries of slavery and continues to experience oppression and institutionalized racism even today. Added to this condition is a belief, either real or imagined, that the benefits of the society in which they live are not accessible to them. Today, individual and collective trauma stems from several factors, including racial profiling, continued police brutality, systemic racism and discrimination, health disparities, voter suppression, and environmental racism, where African Americans reside in environments where the water, air, and or land are toxic. Some even experience trauma from the daily management of white spaces. For example, an individual may work in a predominantly white space or white environment in which they may feel compelled or pressured to monitor what they say, how they say it, what they wear, and even their hairstyles. W.B. Du Bois describes this struggle as having a double consciousness. The effects of our present day collective trauma center around our internalized racism, which oftentimes manifests itself in self-hatred or doubt and even imposter phenomena in which we feel as though we don't deserve to be in a certain place or space, despite evidence showing otherwise of our achievements. Trauma may also be present as a result of colorism or preferential treatment based upon one's skin tone, the loss of cultural heritage or cultural homelessness, struggles with racial identity, a constant state of alertness, or an ongoing sense of danger, even in the absence of a direct threat, and the mistrust of authorities and institutions, including law enforcement, the medical field, social services, and both legal and educational systems, can result from our collective traumatic experiences. It's crucial to note that the mistrust felt may be entirely justified, given the presence of systemic racism. It is also important to note that one's response to trauma is individualized, and that not all people respond to traumatic events the same way. The impact of trauma can also show up as difficulty regulating one's emotions, emotional numbness, depression and anxiety, alcohol and other drug abuse, and physical symptoms such as headaches, high blood pressure, diabetes, fatigue, asthma, difficulty sleeping, and oftentimes, especially within the African American community, overeating, which is simply sometimes not just a result of having a good meal, but a result of trying to medicate or self-medicate intolerable reality. It's important to know that sometimes feelings of abandonment and the loss of faith or a spiritual connection may be experienced. In fact, several researchers have expressed that the historical collective trauma experienced by those enslaved may have been passed down through our genes, thereby altering how our genes work and causing what some have called a trauma inheritance. I want to share a personal connection to the topic of collective trauma. While I've been dedicated to addressing mental health disparities and supporting collective healing in our community for over 30 years, one pivotal moment stands out to me, one that profoundly shaped my view and understanding of this issue. It occurred shortly after Hurricane Katrina, which of course was another collective traumatic event. Many of you may recall that Hurricane Katrina resulted in hundreds of African Americans from New Orleans, Louisiana, being abandoned for days without food, clothing, adequate shelter, and medical supplies and care. It was in the aftermath of this catastrophic storm when my father, who was 60 years old, 6'3", and weighed about 300 pounds at the time, was mistaken for a 20-year-old, 120-pound man and brutally beaten by 2 police officers on his own property in southeastern Louisiana. He was beaten and knocked into a deep trench where he had a seizure, was taken to the hospital where he remained guarded by a police officer, and then later taken to jail. My father was a pillar in the community, a deacon in the church, and a retired truck driver. He had never seen the inside of a jail until that day. As you can imagine, the impact of this experience caused my father lasting physical and emotional wounds, which he carried with him until his passing in 2013. His experience reawakened a strong desire in me to engage in conversations about race, racism, and social justice. Unfortunately, my father's experience is not unique. The murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, countless others, and the alarming disproportionate number of African Americans who passed away during COVID are all collective traumatic events that we've witnessed on television or learned about through others or even experienced ourselves. The principle of Ujima beckons us to acknowledge our collective experiences, grieve our collective past and pain, and support each other through collective healing. This is where Ujima becomes so powerful. It affirms the interconnectedness between an individual's emotional and physical health and the emotional and physical health of the African American community. Let's now focus on our collective freedom as we explore resilience and emotional liberation. An undeniable hallmark of the African American community is our collective resilience as a culture. Though collective trauma remains, we stand tall, rooted in faith, and continue to emerge more resilient. Resilience is not about suppressing or ignoring our pain, but about finding a way to thrive even in its presence. As a professional counselor, I want to offer 8 practical strategies that can help us embrace our continued collective resilience and well-being. Number 1, lean into your spirituality and faith. The Black church has historically been a strong pillar of support within the African American community. Research has shown a connection between prayer and our ability to cope and our ability to heal. Number 2, practice radical self-care. Create space for yourself to engage in activities that bring you joy and fulfillment and allow you to connect with your authentic self. Number 3, give yourself the gift of self-compassion. Some individuals in the African American community have been taught to extend forgiveness and compassion to everyone else but themselves. Self-compassion silences the inner critic, which is that part of us that is overly harsh and requires perfectionism. I encourage you to be gentle with yourself, understanding and accepting that you are a human being who is simply having a human experience. Number 4, seek professional counseling and therapy. So of course I am a believer in seeking professional counseling and therapy. I am indeed an advocate in this area. I recommend seeking help from someone who uses a person-centered, trauma-informed approach to providing counseling and embraces your cultural experiences and intentionally inquires about your culture and related experiences. Number 5, practice mindfulness and stress management. We can engage in mindfulness through intentionally embracing silence, deep and paced breathing, and physical exercise, all which help to reduce stress on our bodies. Number 6, build support networks. Our healing occurs both individually and in community. I encourage you to nurture existing relationships and possibly rebuild previous relationships with those with whom you may have lost contact. Find spaces and places that allow you to both offer as well as receive support. Number 7, join a healing circle. Healing circles provide a supportive, safe space where individuals can share their challenges and come together in solidarity, strength, and hope. And finally, advocate for policy and systemic change. Getting involved with a community organization, advocacy group, or task force working to challenge systemic racism in institutions like law enforcement, education, healthcare, and housing can reduce the pressures and the sources of racial stress. For lasting change, we must intentionally commit to the work of psychological and emotional healing, not just for ourselves, but for our families, our community, and the generations to come. Our community must care for our mental and emotional health with the same commitment we have to our physical well-being. When it comes to collective work and responsibility, one thing that we have to just highlight is the fact that a lot of times mental health is considered a stigma in African American communities, and we tend to hide all of our issues under the rug. But again, when looking at collective trauma and the power of collective healing, it's very important for us to support each other in acknowledging that there may be some trauma and mental health issues that may exist. Support each other in addressing those traumas, as well as supporting each other in the collective grieving process. And when doing so, a dynamic force tends to come to play, and that is experiencing emotional and psychological liberation, which indeed is a gift in and of itself. Ujima calls us out of our silos to experience emotional liberation from the impact of our collective trauma, thereby allowing us to fully hold space for our brothers and sisters' problems and chart a path of strength, hope, and healing for ourselves and for future generations.
We thank you for joining us this evening. I know that you gained a great deal of insight and a different viewpoint of collective work and responsibility. What impressed me most about Dr. Tyra Whittaker is the work that she does in making sure that we know our healing is our responsibility, both individually and collectively as people in the African diaspora. Be sure to join us tomorrow as we have Kenya Murray Morris. She will be speaking on the principle of NIA, purpose. See you tomorrow.